from weeks 9 to 17, he was the RB9. He averaged 124 yards from scrimmage in the back half of last year.
Right here.
Talk a little bit about Joe Mixon. We've had some chirping going around. Johnny, the OC, Brian Callahan, came out saying, referring to Joe Mixon as a volume carrier. Okay. He gets better as he gets more carries. As the season went along, we got better getting him more touches. The more Joe touches the ball, the better it is for us, no doubt. So, I mean, we're basically seeing what happened here at the end of last year. We saw that the team invested in Joe Mixon and getting him the ball more, and he flourished down the stretch. So, Johnny, I got to ask you, with Joe Burrow coming into town, do you think the offense is good enough, and does Joe Mixon, is he poised for a monster year?
Joe Mixon, I actually really, really like Joe Mixon. You look at what he did towards the end of the season. I mean, he really picked it up, and it showed. Like he said, when he gets more volume, there are like some running backs that are truly like this, right? Like Derrick Henry. You give him you give him the rock more, he's going to wear a defense down. He's going to break through, and then he has these monster games. And it's funny because you don't think of Joe Mixon as like this big bruiser back, but like he's a lot bigger than you think he is. I don't have his sorry, I should probably pull up his stats here before I start talking about him, right? But Joe Mixon is going to be the guy behind that offensive line, and a lot of people aren't really talking about Joe Mixon in the top 10. And, I find myself, Nick Chubb or Joe Mixon. I keep going back between the two. But, I mean, look, Joe Mixon, 6'1", 228. I mean, that's a big running back, okay? And he doesn't look that big on the field or when you're watching him on TV, but he's a big bruiser running back. They should get him more involved in the pass game. He can do that. He did that in college. This offensive line is going to be a lot better. I think quietly Joe Mixon, not a lot of people are talking about Joe Mixon. And, if you're in the back half of drafts, in that 10-11 spot, and you're able to walk away with a Joe Mixon, I think, you're not going to get a lot of people that turn heads and say, oh man, I really want a Joe Mixon. But I think by the end of the year, a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I wish I would have, in that sixth, 7th spot, I would have went with Joe Mixon instead of,
I think people are looking at the overall finish, right? RB11 overall, and they're like, okay, well, I'm kind of getting a guy right where he probably will finish. But if you actually look like, and during that stretch last year, he was 19th, in fantasy points per game. So not exactly the sexiest pick in your first round. But then you look at it, it's like, after they started committing to the run, as OC Brian Callahan was talking about, from weeks 9 to 17, he was the RB9. He averaged 124 yards from scrimmage in the back half of last year. But one of the stats I love about Joe Mixon, I tweeted this out the other day, he was number 1 in evaded tackles with 103. So this guy can play kind of with the line being down. He can play with it being better, and he can catch the ball. He's increased his catching ability. And I think this is the perfect running back for Zach Taylor to build a Rams-style offense around, because he can equate to a guy with the skill of Todd Gurley and be the focal point or main vein of this offense. So for me, I like Joe Mixon, and I think he's got good upside. He's definitely one of the guys when I'm on the turn that I'm considering, because he's sitting there with a guy, like Josh Jacobs and him to start your draft off. I think you're playing really, really well with a lot of volume there to start RB heavy in a year where, there's depth at wide receiver in later rounds.
Well, and I also think
I just want to comment. I thought it was. Oh, go ahead, Johnny.
Oh, I just want to say that, Joe Mixon had 12 goal line carries last year on a pretty bad Bengals team. Like, this Bengals team seems to be much improved, at least on paper. So it's like, you got to think that he would get more than 12 goal line carries. So if you're pairing that with the amount of touches that he's seen through his first few years of 250 plus touches, like, that's looking really good.
I was just going to add, because we're talking about, as Joe Mixon's usage and volume increases, it's better for the team. The Jets, Adam Gase just came out in the last week kind of talking the opposite about LeVeon Bell. And I thought it was sort of an interesting thing that the idea is, inverted here. Maybe if he lessens the usage of LeVeon Bell, it's going to be better for the team. I don't know if either are going to bode well for the fantasy football team that rosters a LeVeon Bell like I did last year. But it was just sort of interesting to think about in that in the opposite scenario. Oh, we gave this running back too much usage last year and it did not pan out. So I'm curious to see if Joe Mixon's going to go too heavy on this direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for real. But I think it's great that you brought in Adam Gase, because we should be, as a fantasy player, we should be doing whatever the opposite of Adam Gase wants to do. He's definitely the guy you want to get those sound bites, so like to stay away from his players, because I mean, we've just seen it. Like, people that go away from Adam Gase thrive. I feel bad for LeVeon Bell, who gets this fat contract, but then is with a guy who has such a love-hate relationship with him in the media. It's really baffling to me.
How frustrating do you think it would be to be in Adam Gase fantasy football league? Like, he would just be like, "Oh, first round pick, don't need it. I'm just gonna do this." It's like, that must be really infuriating to be in his fantasy football league, because it's just completely unpredictable.
I think Chelsea bringing up a good point here, though, because when you get this coach speak, you definitely want to be with the guys that are talking about getting their guys more volume. Like, that even scares. I love Le'Veon Bell. I think he's being slept on. I think the line's improved. He's probably a sure thing for 300 touches, but I do not feel good when Adam Gase is coming out and saying things like this. Yeah. And it just might give you that extra edge to draft a guy like Chris Carson ahead of him, or even a David Johnson, and consider, because of what's being said by his coach.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Whisperers podcast. You can hear more from John and Travis on Google Play, SoundCloud, and iTunes. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at TF Whisperers.